That was a fabulous choice. I really like that song because it does encompass so much of what we do throughout our days to make our own days glad and also benefit those we love and sometimes those we don't. So today I want to talk about hunger, and I really figured out how to talk about food. Really, like that's really my goal. It's like, how can I talk about food when what I really want to do is share a meal, right? We're back to being fairly well contained in our own homes. And food has become a new way of life for me. So there's a Japanese concept that we have adopted in our house that's almost a mantra. Started out as a joke, but then it has become the question we ask ourselves. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the term is called kuchi sabishi, at least that's, I think, how you pronounce it. And it is a uniquely Japanese word that literally means lonely mouth, or longing to have or put something in one's mouth. So when one of us, my wife, myself, our adult daughter who's living with us, goes to the kitchen for a snack, or let's just be honest, maybe it's the 7th snack of the day, that action is sometimes accompanied by the comment, "My mouth is lonely." And maybe you can relate. Because sometimes it's not about the food, it's about the action or the flavor or the experience, not the hunger for that particular time. But we as humans are hungry beings. We hunger for so many things, food, of course, but also hunger for connection and community, recognition for our work and talents and passions, challenges to be met. We hunger for stories and poetry and music and art to uplift us. We hunger for expanded information to be integrated into our worldview so that we're learning. We hunger for a feeling of meaning in the face of a vast and confusing universe, for peaceful respite from the madding crowd, and for the comfort of being grounded and centered in our bodies, with the deep knowing that our spirits are part of the divine web of all life. Now, it can be difficult at times to discern from all the options what the nature of our hunger truly is calling us to welcome into our bodies, minds, and souls. Do you want pizza, pork chops, pomegranates? Another P word, pumpkin. Or what about maybe you want kale or cucumbers or cookies? Cookies, for sure. Does your mind long for the New York Times or television news? Do you want conversation or contemplation, love or lust or leverage? We also hunger for safe and supportive places to open up to these questions and examine them without judgment or ridicule or false exuberance of like, wow, go you. That doesn't feed our souls either. To whom and to where do we go to have those hungers for recognition and listening satisfied? So, truth to be told, I too jumped on the sourdough bandwagon in 2020. Sourdough, puff pastry. I even discovered sourdough cinnamon rolls, which has been an entirely new game changer in our house. And of course, cookies. Now, I've always been a decent and sometimes experimental cook. Mostly my experiments resulted in yummy dinners, but sometimes it was cereal. And I had baked bread before, most of the time when my children were small, but I used store-bought yeast. That's what I was taught growing up. My grandmother maybe did know about sourdough, but she didn't use it regularly, and my mom didn't either. So I used store-bought yeast, but sourdough was an intimidating, entirely different group of beings. Wild yeasts. You can't predict what they're going to do. They're wild. Yeast is a living organism. It feeds on carbohydrates and releases carbon dioxide and alcohol. Wild yeast of the genus Brettanomyces is found in the natural world and can be easily captured from plants, animals, your home, and yes, even your skin. A sourdough starter, or a yeast starter for beer, captures that wild yeast, and the yeast releases carbon dioxide and alcohol that helps to leaven your bread and enable the fermentation of beer. Now, when we talk about fermentation, some of us like to think about sauerkraut, which I also make, but that is a totally different magic scientific process that's kind of like decomposition, in that we allow the bacteria, the lactic acid bacteria, to eat away at some of the cell walls within the cabbage. So obviously sauerkraut is raw cabbage. You chop it up finely and add salt, but in addition to the adding of salt, you need to manipulate the cabbage. So you pound it either with, or squeeze it with your hands, or pound it with, a wooden dowel of some sort to release the liquid, which then combines with various lactic acid bacteria to change the chemistry of the cabbage into something else. Takes a few weeks. Your house will smell like sauerkraut. But this fermentation gives sauerkraut a longer shelf life and a distinctive sour flavor. And of course, you can use fermentation on a host of other foods to preserve them for long periods. I have tried fermenting cucumbers. They're a whole different kind of pickle experience. For me, it took some getting used to, but they're not bad. Like humans and other living beings, sourdough starter needs regular attention and feeding to be viable. It also has some temperature needs as well, since too much warmth will kill the yeast. Well, thank goodness, or the loaves I bake would take up the whole oven. And keeping it cold inhibits the yeast's activity, which is helpful since I store it in my fridge because I don't want to bake bread every day. The food is simple for yeast: water and flour. Different kinds of flour give different results, but a lot of us home cooks use unbleached white flour. The other ingredient is time. The yeasts need time to do their work. Of course, we have simple needs for nourishment, no matter how complicated we like to make our food look. Herbalist and founder of the Wise Woman tradition, Susan Weed, says, "The heart of health is nourishment. Nourishment brings substance and energy, matter and vibration into our being. Through all our sense, by all our impression, we are nourished." Nourishment includes, but is not limited to, the intake of protein, minerals, sugars, water, light, images, sounds, touches, emotions, ideas, and awareness. All of these things feed us. All of these things give us hope and energy. And they contribute to our health and well-being. So we can get these needs met from many sources. And the nourishment we seek as individuals is as unique as we are, and shifts as we grow and change. Now, when I was a kid, I never thought I would be nourished by navy bean soup. Nope, not gonna happen. My childhood aversion to this soup made for long nights sitting at the dinner table while the soup turned cold and my parents got angry. But as an adult, I found the combination of beans and vegetables and seasoning that absolutely feels nourishing for my body and brings a soul comfort I never could have imagined sitting on that hard dining room chair. So perhaps what I needed was to feel a connection with nourishment rather than punishment. I found this poem by Elsa Garcia that illustrates how our souls are fed alongside our bodies when we find love in the recipe. She says, "I made soup tonight and all my ancestors danced in the pot with the barley and the beans, the knuckle and neck bones enriching the brew. Here women joined love and ancient wisdom, the knowledge salt and pepper brings, secrets that are ritual and legacy." The Native American food writer Edward Epps Brown said, "You need to put yourself into the food and then the blessedness comes out of it." Now, I think that's true in almost everything we do. When we put ourselves into the process of living, of creating a life that honors what am I really hungry for, then we find the blessedness of nourishment. That's what's different in the idea of nourishment versus the idea of, I'm going to make a resolution and do this thing. Coming from the shoulds, coming from the have-tos, coming from an outside influence doesn't always work. Nourishing our bodies does nourish our minds and our spirits as well. We are all of a piece. I live my entire life in this skin, no matter how many times I think ahead or regret the past or try to imagine myself something different. I'm pretty much planted right here. We cannot divide ourselves into pieces, not successfully for very long. We often neglect to maintain awareness in one realm or another. That's not surprising. We eat whatever's at hand while we're rushing to do something else. We scan the news online to be informed, but we miss the heart of the stories and the people who are involved. And my personal favorite that I practice again and again, I take a yoga class and I think, oh, I'm here to stretch, I'm here to use my muscles, and then somewhere in the middle, I remind myself, I'm here to breathe. I'm here to be surprised and enlightened and expanded by the fact that my body moves when I ask it to, and sometimes doesn't. And how do I deal with that? And conversely, what was once nourishing can become detrimental. Foods and activities and practices that we cultivate can go from feeding a hunger to creating more disturbance in our lives. As I have aged, I have found that I cannot eat and digest foods that I used to have no problem assimilating. And I bet you have a list of the, I wish I could eat that again, foods too. And also activities. You know, I used to be a runner. It made me feel terrific, shockingly, to finish running 7 or 8 miles. But even on the days I had to push myself to like it for the first mile or mile and a half. A few years ago, I started noticing pain in my foot, specifically my left foot and my right hip. I tried several adjustments to my running style, increased my strength training and stretching, and that helped me find a new comfort level for a while, but not for long. I had to listen deeply to my body, and I decided to give up running so that I could choose activities that are less poundy on my joints. And since then, I've been able to enjoy new ways of moving and feeling strong and confident. But if I had not paid attention to my own changing need for what nourished me, I may have ended up with a serious injury or chronic pain that I'd still be dealing with for years to come. Finding what I was truly hungry for, exercise that feels energizing, empowering, and fun, allowed me to release running as an activity that no longer nourished me as it once did. So being home for most of the past 2 years gave my hunger for growing things a boost. I put more energy into my small garden space. I got real homesteady here in Queens, New York. I revived my skills in pickling and canning and making jam and crocheting and sewing. And I am teaching myself very slowly to embroider on a tablecloth that I have. I cannot believe we've been doing this for almost 2 years, but in these 2 years, I have relearned what it means to feed my hunger for creative nourishment. And I found others who want to do the same. We gather in community, this group of women and I, twice a week. Not everybody comes every time, but we share our creativity, our coronavirus fears, our frustrations, our foibles and insights. It has been a sanity sanctuary for me and a form of nourishment I didn't realize I needed as much as I have come to realize. There are myriad ways we can seek to nourish ourselves as multifaceted individuals. But what about the part of us that hungers for social justice and other community-oriented desires? I would argue that this is the way we honor that third UU principle of acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. Our desires for social justice, for equality and fairness and reparations are deeply embedded in that third principle. Now, y'all know me. I've spoken with you a number of times, and it is rare that you will hear me quote the Christian Bible. But the teachings called the Sermon on the Mount, or the Beatitudes, attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, are some of the most fascinating to me, both in what is recorded and what is not. I mean, it literally says Jesus opened his mouth and said these words. Certainly he must have said other words. Who decides what gets written down? That's a topic for another day. But today I want to call your attention to the teaching, "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." And that idea of righteousness can often call up kind of weird and icky feelings for me, because I assigned it a very small definition of holier than thou behavior, in which one person seeks to prove how good or godly they are in comparison to others. But I decided to do a little bit more digging. And I found out that the broader understanding of righteousness incorporates integrity and living according to the ways of the divine. And I talk about that stuff all the time. Hungering for righteousness can be understood as longing to live in integrity within ourselves and within our communities. We yearn to have the spark of the divine within us honored and celebrated in our collective experience. And what is social justice but the desire to have that honor and celebration we wish for ourselves to be expanded to all those we know and don't know, so as to create communities in which all living beings, including this planet, are honored and nurtured for the highest good. And you can't talk about nourishment without talking about satiety. Nourishment and understanding satisfaction are deeply embedded within each other. They are entwined. The teaching of Jesus says that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness shall be satisfied. Satiety is the quality of enoughness that tells us we're full after a meal. It is the balance of satisfaction that comes after we have filled our bellies and before the food coma. When we are nourished on a consistent basis, our bodies, minds, and spirit learn what enough feels like. Satiety gives us the capacity for leisure and rest. Sister Joan Chittister, I can't believe I'm quoting a nun. You can write this down, friends. She is actually one of my current day sheroes. The wisdom that that woman pours out is beyond my comprehension. She talks about the nourishment we get from pausing from the rushing so that we can be leisurely. She says, leisure makes the human more human by engaging the heart and broadening the vision, deepening the insight and stretching the soul. I love that because leisure means fun. Fun? I'm totally down for fun. And learning what we are truly hungry for allows us to know that we no longer have to seek out ways to fill ourselves up overmuch, because we understand that we will have more chances to eat, work, create, rest, and connect with others. When we live in balance, we affirm our love of life, our love of each other and the planet, and our commitment to giving and receiving nourishment. Author Mark David writes in Nourishing Wisdom, I recognize that at its deepest level, eating is an affirmation of life. Each time I eat, I agree somewhere inside to continue life on earth. I acknowledge that this choice to eat is a fundamental act of love and nourishment, a true celebration of my existence. As a human being on earth, I agree to be an eater. I choose life again and again. So ask yourself. I invite you to ask, what am I truly hungry for? And then wait. Wait for the answer to arise within you. Sometimes it can take a while for the inner cacophony of should do's and must be's, and for some of us, shame for even daring to ask the question rather than just take what's given, to quiet it. to quiet enough for the small voice of our inner wisdom to be heard. This is another nourishing spiritual practice, just as much as meditation, service, and honoring our ancestors. Taking the time to allow the answer to arise, to evaluate if that is the true answer or the convenient or expected answer, is to feed our trust in our own soul's knowing. From that place of deep truth, we can make choices that feed all our needs. Choosing nourishment in all forms is to affirm life and our participation in the cycles and seasons of embodied living. Embodiment in our unique skin suits, while also feeding our minds and spirits with the ideas, relationships, and sacred rest that answers our hunger for life beyond our physical needs. May we find the way to care for each other too, just like the villagers in the story, working within our own best practices, honoring our hungers, and living in the integrity of righteousness to lovingly expand the nourishment of our communities. Blessed be.